So for people who don't know, Dylan Burns is like some 20, 21-year-old, something like that, American Twitch streamer who claims to be like a foreign policy expert specialist, right? Like he has all of the correct ideas about how the US should do its imperialism and why, all of which just so happen to align perfectly with the US foreign policy establishment, though his justifications are a bit more modern for the young 20-ish-year-old progressive crowd. Like, you know, we need to do all the same imperialism as before for women's rights. We need to defend democracy from the evil yellow peril Chinese threat, all that sort of thing. So he's really not that much different than you know, the generic sort of Kissinger sort of people, since they also use that second justification, but he tries to make it sound like progressive in a way that he can sell it to like people who might be more inclined to be more critical of US interventionism. And he's someone who's very clearly pining to become like a Washington DC analyst or like advisor type. And I think we all know what that means, right? Like that means that he wants to be like a Kissinger type, right? Like there's no such thing as a foreign policy analyst in DC or like someone involved. Even worse than an analyst is someone who's involved in like the actual advisement of politicians, because those people are the worst. Their job is essentially to find justifications for US imperialism. So that's basically where Dylan Burns comes from. He's already done some very minor work that he likes to play up as like a foreign policy advisor for failed political candidates, which I don't even know what that entails. Like, why does someone who like came third in an election warrant even having a minor like local election warrant having a foreign policy advisor? That's kind of funny and ridiculous. But yeah, that's like him basically. And he tries to sell people this, you know, generic US foreign interventionist foreign policy on Twitch. And he's been quite successful at it, but I'm not sure if that's because it's actually swaying people or basically because, like, you know, he's basically telling your generic American exceptionalists what they want to hear, right? Like your generic American patriot nationalist exceptionalist, which is 90% of the US population at the very least, wants to hear that US imperialism is good. You know, they want to be told that the things that they'd be doing anyway are good, but they also kind of want to be told, you know, that they're good for reasons that might be a little bit different to the norm, right? You can't sell this stuff by just saying, oh, communism, bad. You also need to, like, add in different things now. Like, you need to, for example, say, that these people are authoritarians with women's rights. You need to try and link leaders who the US finds inconvenient to terrorism or organized crime or whatever, no matter how untenable it is. That's where Dylan Burns comes in and people like him come in. I'm going to critique this guy, and I'm also going to use it as a bit of a springboard to talk about how the very notion of foreign policy is totally fucking ludicrous. But first, let me make a bit of an analogy here. Imagine that you have some guy, like 20, 21-year-old dude from China, who starts posting on Twitter or whatever. He makes like a Twitch stream, and he's like, hey guys, here's why all the stuff that China would be doing anyway is actually good, and why China should continue doing it, and why you should support it. And, you know, it's like, that's a bit sketch. Let's look into this guy. And it's like, oh, he's worked for like, as like an advisor to Chinese politicians before. He's interned, for pro-government Chinese NGOs. He's like very clearly trying to like get a job in like the Beijing foreign ministry or something. And it's like, maybe this guy is a bit of a fucking government shill. And then you look at Dylan Burns and it's like, that's literally him. That's literally Dylan Burns. Like, that analogy is Dylan Burns. But because he's doing it for the US government, it's okay, right? Because he's not doing it for the evil yellow peril Chinese government, it's no longer state propaganda. He's actually a nuanced, really well-read, incredibly smart political analyst, despite the fact that he's like some 21-year-old fucking kid in like his first year of an international relations degree. And by the way, you can really tell where that comes in, because there's this thing where students of these sort of relatively abstract disciplines, notably international relations, political science, and sometimes economics. So I don't think economics as a whole is that abstract. I think like a lot of the stuff that you learn in your first few years is very abstract and you don't really come out learning much. But international relations and political science are these incredibly abstract disciplines that don't really tell you anything useful about the world, right? Most useful political theory doesn't come from international relations or political science, despite the fact that you would think they produce a lot. It comes from social science and like philosophy, history. These disciplines do way more for actually useful, actionable political theory than the actual like entirely theoretical based disciplines of political science and international relations. And this kid is like, just took like the introductory international relation class and he's always trying to make references to like the basics of international relations theory as if he's some sort of incredible brain genius because he's just repeating uncritically the sort of stuff that they told him in class. And it's very cringe. It's definitely unbased. It works because the average American has no fucking clue what's going on. So they see this guy and he's like justifying the things that they already believed in a way that fits with their pre-existing like sort of socially progressive biases. And they're like, wow, this guy fucking rules. Hence the success and hence the fact that he's going to end up in a couple of years at the very most probably being like a formal advisor to like Democrat imperialists telling them how to sell like the latest war. But as I was saying, like imagine a Chinese guy doing the same exact shit. Those same people would hate that person. They'd like be making like 20 post long Twitter threads about how he's a government propagandist and a shill, and how actually China is a terrible, evil imperialist state, far worse than the US could ever hope to be. But because Dylan Burns is an American doing that, their brains turn off and they can't critique it. Probably one of the best things I've seen is just an example of how stupid Dylan Burns and people like him actually is this tweet. This other streamer, if you don't know who he is, I don't know how, but this other streamer, Hassan Piker, like had a take saying that the US shouldn't provide like $2 billion to Taiwan so that it can buy weapons. Okay.
Now is literally because we have been escalating tensions against China by beefing up Taiwan, giving Taiwan, what is it, like $1.8 billion worth of arms? Like what is this?
Attention, Westerners.
I'm gonna keep it at 100, okay? I'm gonna keep it real. Why don't we do this for Hawaii? Like, what would happen if China was just like, you know what? We're just going to give Hawaii $1.8 billion worth of fucking drones so that the indigenous population there can fucking defend itself. Okay? Which would be a little bit more justifiable than what the fuck we're doing here with respect.
No, that sounds completely correct there, by the way. Puerto Rico probably would have been a better analogy, but he's completely correct. And Dylan Burns' response to Hassan saying that, you know, the US shouldn't pump Taiwan full of weapons is to say, yo, like, you know, he's obviously trying to suck up to him because he wants to leech off Hassan's clout, because Hassan is a massive streamer. He gets like 40,000 views sometimes, 40,000 viewers sometimes, like concurrent viewers. And he's like, do you really believe that United States should not provide Taiwan with the means to defend itself? Literally like propagandistic language, right? The means to defend itself. It's exactly what you would expect from like a government proclamation. And this is like a nuanced, like foreign policy analyst or whatever. And then his justification for it is the Taiwan Relations Act, which has been law since 1979, clearly states that the United States should provide Taiwan with arms of a defensive character. Oh, so if US law says that the US should give weapons to Taiwan, the US should give weapons to Taiwan. Holy shit. That's an amazing argument. Wow. I've got another great argument for you, foreign policy expert Dylan Burns. The Nazi declaration of war on Poland says that the Nazis should go to war against Poland. Ergo, Nazi Germany's war against Poland is legitimate and good. Does that sound good to you? It's literally the exact same fucking argument. We passed a law saying that the thing that we want to do is good and that we should do it. Ergo, this thing is good and we should do it. This is the level of analysis of a 20-year-old first-year international relations student. Oh my god. This is like the level of the average American liberal. This is what passes for like high-level analysis for them. The bill also states the President of Congress shall determine the nature and quantity of such defense articles and services based solely upon their judgment of the needs of Taiwan. Is this? Who fucking cares? So the consideration of Beijing's reaction to the continuation of this long-standing policy is not taken into account. And then he's like, this is because it could undermine our commitment to Taiwan's security. And this is a vital building block of not only Taiwanese national security, but also our relationship to the island nation. He sounds like a fucking US government press release. He literally sounds like a US government press release. He sounds like a straight up, it could be a Republican or a Democrat government. It could be George W. Bush. He talks like a fucking US government press release. The island nation, you can't make this shit up. He's clearly trying to sell himself to, like, you know, people who want to hire someone like him to sell US imperialism in Washington, D.C. That's why he talks like this. That's why he says the stuff that he does. You know, he wants a cushy, like, 6-figure salary job, like telling people in Washington, so, you know, you could justify this invasion of Iran by saying that women there wouldn't have to wear a hijab afterwards. That sounds pretty good to me. What do you think, Joe? Oh, no, sorry. What do you think, Kamala? Yeah, that's pretty good, Jillian. Great job. Here's your $500,000 under the table bribe. And it's Kamala because Biden will be dead by then. Like, yeah, the guy is clearly trying to sell himself as neutral to people who lack the critical thinking capacity to question what he's saying. And all that he's doing is selling you, like, the most obvious US imperialist talking points imaginable. It's not obvious to Americans and people who are inclined to like America because, you know, they've been brainwashed into US exceptionalism their entire lives. They believe that the US needs to, like, be the world police and fix the entire world, which makes it very easy to manipulate them into believing that US imperialism is actually a good thing. And yeah, the fact that Dylan Burns sells himself as a leftist is absolutely fucking ludicrous. There's not a single leftist belief that he has. And this is another thing that I wanted to link into this, is that the notion of US foreign policy, like the way that people in the US talk about foreign policy, is truly ridiculous. It's not the same way that people think about foreign policy in other countries. In other countries, foreign policy is like diplomacy, right? It's like just our general interactions with other countries as equals or whatever, right? In the US, foreign policy is not that. It's a question of, how should we interfere in these other countries? How should we act upon these other countries? What should we do to these other countries? And that's the position that people like Dylan Burns and 99.9% of Americans come from. It's like, we need to act upon these other countries. We need to do things to them. We have to do things to them. We can't just leave them to their own devices. We must mold them how we think we should. And of course, Dylan Burns, like, probably, I don't know, he might legitimately think that, like, his prescriptions of what the US should do to other countries are going to help the people there or whatever. But the fact is that US imperialism has been sold in that way for more than a century. It's always been sold like that. It's always been, you know, we're bringing democracy to these people. We're doing things to help them, whether the people who are implementing these policies actually believe that or not. That's the way that it's sold. Dylan Burns is just another guy who's useful for selling that exact same sort of thing. Like, if you're an American, I think one of the best things that you can do is to change the way that you think about quote-unquote foreign policy, not to think about it in these terms anymore, not to think about it in how can the US act upon other nations. For all these people's, like, performative denouncements of the US enemies, like Russia and China, they think a lot like a Duginist. The principal geopolitical thought in Russia is basically that, right? You know, how can Russia act upon these other nations and get what we want out of them? That's exactly how Americans think. It's exactly how Dylan Burns thinks. It's exactly how everyone in the US government and everyone with this sort of mentality thinks. They're not as different from the evil enemies as they think they are. So yeah, basically the thesis here is, most importantly, because really Dylan Burns is not an important person at all. One, change the way that you think about foreign policy. It can't just be how the US acts upon other countries. How about you let other countries do their fucking thing instead of trying to be the police of the world? And really, that's not even what the US does, okay? What the US does is try to defend its interests around the world, try to make money for the corporations who are the ones who are donating and winning campaigns for political candidates there. And two, far less important, is that Dylan Burns is just the government shill. He's a US government shill. Doesn't matter what government is there. In terms of his specialty, which he somehow convinced a bunch of even stupider people that he holds, foreign policy, he is completely in line with the Republicans and the Democrats. Doesn't matter which party. They're both the same one. Foreign policy. I could easily see like a Republican administration hiring Dylan Burns to be like, oh, imagine that I've got his Lego blockhead, right? The reason that we need to reinvade Iraq is because recently a lot of women in Iraq have been forced to wear hijabs. So we need to start bombing them and killing hundreds of thousands of them immediately. Thank you very much. Goodbye. I honestly cannot believe that take on Twitter, like literally just like justifying massive US military aid to Taiwan purely because it's the law. I just wanted to note, like, he notes that this law began in 1979. Like, the fact that this law dates back to 1979 proves precisely why the US actually supports Taiwan. It's not because of democracy. It's not because of freedom. It's not because Taiwan is a great democratic nation. It's to have a geopolitical ally against the big, bad, evil yellow peril China. Because in 1979, Taiwan was a fascist dictatorship that was actively doing state terrorism against the population every single day. Taiwan was under fucking martial law. Like, the idea that the US supports Taiwan because of democracy and freedom rather than because they need a convenient place to send weapons and to threaten China from that's right next to its mainland is absurd. That's why this epic act, that this law that Dylan Burns uses to justify US imperialism, is in place. Specifically because the US doesn't fucking care that Taiwan was a dictatorship. By the way, it was far worse of a totalitarian dictatorship than China is today. They don't care that it was doing state terrorism against its population, imprisoning journalists, whatever. And that really just shows you what Dylan Burns is really about. Dylan Burns does not defend the US's relationship with Taiwan because he believes that Taiwan is an epic democracy that deserves sovereignty or whatever. He does it because he's a supporter of US imperialism. It's very simple.